My name is Simone. I am 32 years old, and I never expected my own father to treat me like a disease on the porch of the home where I grew up. One day before the lavish engagement party of my own younger brother, my father blocked the front door and told me I was not coming. He said they could not embarrass themselves because of me. A few moments later, my brother snatched the expensive bottle of wine from my hands and laughed in my face, telling me my cheap aesthetic would ruin his entire upscale event. They had no idea that the very company paying for that entire lavish lifestyle was mine. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth and tried to diminish your light. Growing up in our family meant projecting a flawless image of excellence to the outside world, even if we were crumbling deep down inside. It was a sweltering Friday afternoon in Atlanta. The humidity hung thick in the air, pressing down heavily on my shoulders as I parked my car just a block away from my childhood home. I did not drive my expensive Porsche Panamera today. I drove a nondescript rental vehicle because I knew my father, Vernon, would instantly turn my financial success into a twisted sermon about how I somehow owed him something. Vernon was a former pastor who treated his local neighborhood association like his own personal divine kingdom. Everything in his life was about appearances, from the freshly cut Bermuda grass on his sprawling suburban lawn to the perfectly polished brass numbers on his heavy oak front door. To the outside world, Vernon was the respected patriarch of an elite, old-money African-American family. To me, he was simply the man who kicked me out of the house when I was 20 years old because I decided to drop out of my pre-med program and start my own business entirely from scratch. I walked slowly up the long, winding concrete driveway, my heels clicking softly against the hot pavement. In my hands, I carefully carried a wooden box containing a vintage bottle of imported French wine. It cost me exactly $2,000. It was meant to be a peace offering, a simple gesture to congratulate my 27-year-old brother Trey on his upcoming engagement. I had not spoken to my parents or my brother properly in 5 long years, but I genuinely thought a wedding might be the right time to extend an olive branch and heal old wounds. The large brick house looked almost exactly the same as it did when I was a teenager. However, if you looked closely, the white paint on the large, majestic columns framing the front porch was definitely beginning to peel and chip completely away. The grand illusion of generational wealth was slowly cracking, just like the emotional foundation of our entire broken family. I stepped onto the wide concrete porch and took a deep breath, preparing myself mentally for a stiff but polite interaction. I pressed the brightly illuminated doorbell. The familiar chimes echoed deep inside the massive house, bringing back a flood of complicated childhood memories. I could hear footsteps approaching from the inside, heavy and deliberate. The heavy, solid oak door swung open, and there stood Vernon. He was dressed immaculately in a crisp white linen shirt and perfectly tailored slacks, looking every bit the distinguished community leader he pretended to be. However, his face hardened the second his eyes landed on me. He did not push open the protective screen door. He did not offer a welcoming smile or even a single simple greeting. He just stood there, physically blocking the entryway like a hostile bouncer at an incredibly exclusive nightclub, his cold eyes scanning me from head to toe with pure, absolute disdain. "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and incredibly polite. "I brought this special gift for Trey today. I know the big engagement party is tomorrow evening, and I simply wanted to drop off a present to celebrate his important milestone." Vernon crossed his arms tightly over his broad chest, his jaw clenching visibly. "You should not have come here, Simone," he said, his voice dropping to a low, harsh whisper, meant specifically to keep the nosy neighbors from hearing our conversation. I stood there on the welcome mat, genuinely confused for a fraction of a second. "I am just dropping off a gift, Dad," I replied softly. "I am not trying to cause a scene or disrupt anything. I know the party is tomorrow night at the country club, so I just wanted to give this to him personally right now." Vernon narrowed his dark eyes, and the sheer cruelty in his intense gaze was completely palpable. "You are not coming to that party tomorrow," he stated very flatly. The harsh words hung heavily in the humid summer air, sharp and entirely unyielding. I felt a tight, painful knot form instantly in my chest, but I stubbornly kept my posture perfectly straight. "Excuse me?" I asked quietly, refusing to let him see an ounce of hurt in my eyes. "You heard me clearly." Vernon continued, leaning aggressively closer to the thin wire mesh of the screen door. "We absolutely cannot embarrass ourselves because of you. Chloe and her family are coming into town tonight for the weekend. Her parents are proud Howard University alumni. They represent old money elite prestige and true generational wealth. They are considered the absolute cream of the crop in Atlanta high society." "And what exactly are you doing right now?" "You are just a foolish college dropout who disappeared from our lives for 5 long years. You have no respected degree, no wealthy husband, and absolutely no standing in our prestigious community. If you show up tomorrow evening mingling freely with prominent doctors, successful lawyers, and wealthy real estate moguls, you will make an absolute mockery of everything this family has worked so hard for." I stared blankly at the older man who was originally supposed to protect and nurture me, listening silently to him strip away my basic human dignity just for the sake of his incredibly fragile ego. He clearly cared much more about impressing a rich family of total strangers than he cared about the feelings of his own flesh and blood. He truly believed deep down that I was a massive failure simply because I did not follow his rigid, suffocating script for my life. I opened my mouth to respond carefully to tell him that my deliberate lack of a traditional medical degree certainly did not define my actual net worth. But right before I could even speak a single spoken word, the heavy wooden front door was suddenly opened much wider. Trey stepped boldly out into the grand foyer, standing right behind our judgmental father. My arrogant little brother was wearing a tailored navy blue suit that looked incredibly sharp from a distance, though my trained eyes immediately noticed the slight puckering at the shoulder seams that clearly indicated it was a rushed job from a very cheap local tailor. Trey had always been considered the golden child of the family, the cherished son who could do absolutely no wrong, even though he had actually spent his entire adult life bouncing recklessly from one failed cryptocurrency scheme to another. He confidently styled himself as an elite financial consultant and a rising real estate mogul, a complete and utter fabrication intentionally designed to impress wealthy women and blindly secure massive bank loans he could never actually repay. Trey looked at me dismissively, then looked down at the expensive wooden wine box securely in both of my own hands. A nasty, incredibly arrogant smirk slowly spread across his handsome face. "Well, well, well," Trey sneered loudly, pushing forcefully past Vernon to open the protective screen door, just enough to rudely snatch the heavy wooden box right out of my hands. "Look who finally decided to crawl out of the dark woodwork. He did not say thank you. He did not invite me inside the house. He simply inspected the unmarked wooden box, immediately assuming it was some cheap grocery store liquor, because he firmly believed I was completely broke and struggling to survive. He looked me up and down slowly, his judgmental eyes lingering critically on my simple unbranded silk blouse and my tailored dark trousers. I had dressed down intentionally today to avoid drawing unnecessary attention, but Trey instantly took it as undeniable confirmation of my extreme poverty. "What are you wearing to my house today, Simone?" He laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed off the high front porch ceiling. I smiled a cold, knowing smile, turned and walked away without speaking. I walked briskly down the perfectly manicured sidewalk of my childhood neighborhood, leaving my father and brother standing on that peeling front porch with their false pride and empty pockets. The heavy, humid Atlanta air felt entirely different the moment I stepped out of their immediate line of sight. It was no longer suffocating or oppressive. It was simply the atmosphere of the city I had long ago conquered. I rounded the corner to where my actual vehicle was parked, hidden safely away from their highly judgmental eyes. I reached into my designer leather handbag, pulled out my heavy keys, and pressed the unlock button. The sleek aerodynamic headlights of my midnight black Porsche Panamera flashed twice in the late afternoon sun, reflecting the golden light of the fading day. The engine roared to life with a deep, satisfying purr that commanded instant respect and signaled absolute power. As I slid gracefully into the buttery, soft, custom-stitched leather driver's seat, I let out a long, slow exhale. They actually thought I was broke. They honestly believed my simple silk blouse was a definitive sign of financial struggle, completely unaware that it was an exclusive custom piece tailored specifically for me in Milan. I shifted the powerful car into drive and pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the pathetic illusion of their suburban elite status far behind in my rearview mirror. I merged seamlessly onto the busy highway, heading straight toward Buckhead, the wealthiest, most vibrant, and most exclusive financial district in the entire city of Atlanta. This was where I actually belonged. I did not need their conditional validation, their pretentious country club memberships, or their incredibly fake forced smiles. I had built an absolute empire with my own two bare hands, and I was going back to my true home. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the highly secure private underground parking garage of my luxury high-rise building. The uniformed valet nodded with deep respect as I stepped out, handing him the keys to the Porsche. "Good evening, Ms. Simone," he said warmly, his tone entirely different from the condescending voice my father had used just an hour ago. I returned his polite greeting and took the private glass elevator directly up to the top floor of the towering residential building. The heavy stainless steel doors slid open silently to reveal my ultimate personal sanctuary. It was a stunning $3 million penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed, breathtaking panoramic view of the sparkling Atlanta skyline. The interior was flawlessly designed with a sense of minimalist elegance that highlighted true wealth rather than screaming it. The massive living space featured imported black marble countertops, sleek modern art installations from up-and-coming black artists, and a massive custom-built mahogany desk in my spacious home office. This penthouse was not bought with inherited family money, and it certainly was not secured by a generous loan from a wealthy husband. It was purchased in cold hard cash funded entirely by the massive and undeniable success of my own company. The quiet hum of the central air conditioning and the faint distant lights of the city below brought me an immense sense of peace and absolute security. This fortress was entirely mine, built on a foundation of relentless hard work, sleepless nights, and an unyielding refusal to accept the miserable narrative my family had attempted to force upon me. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Vision Group. We are a powerhouse brand strategy and venture capital firm that caters exclusively to high net worth individuals, massive tech startups, and highly influential global luxury brands. When I was 20 years old, my father kicked me out of his house with nothing but a single worn-out suitcase and a harsh lecture about my imminent failure. He told me that by dropping out of pre-med, I had single-handedly destroyed my future and brought immense shame to our family name. During those first few brutal years, I slept on a desperately uncomfortable mattress in a cramped, drafty studio apartment. I worked 3 grueling jobs just to keep the basic utilities running while I meticulously built my detailed business plan late into the night. Now at 32 years old, I control a dynamic financial portfolio worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I dictate major market trends. I fund the innovative future. And I do it all without ever needing to rely on the fragile, toxic men in my family who clearly thrive on tearing independent women down just to make themselves feel artificially taller. The culture I built at Apex Vision Group is the exact opposite of the toxic environment I was raised in. We value absolute transparency, fierce loyalty, and rewarding raw talent over empty prestige. I empower my team to be ruthless in business, but deeply supportive of one another, creating a corporate family that actually lifts people up instead of constantly tearing them down. I poured myself a tall crystal glass of imported sparkling water, added a fresh slice of bright lemon, and walked gracefully over to my massive office desk. I opened my sleek silver laptop, the bright screen instantly illuminating the darkening room as the sun finally set over the sprawling city. As a high-level CEO, my corporate inbox is constantly flooded with high-stakes financial contracts, urgent investment pitches, and immediate media requests. I quickly filtered through the excessive daily noise, my trained eyes rapidly scanning for top priority items that required my immediate personal attention. That is when a very specific email caught my attention and made me pause. It was from Chloe, my newly promoted Senior Vice President of Communications. Chloe was only 26 years old, but she was an absolute force of nature in the corporate world. She was brilliant, fiercely ambitious, and possessed a razor-sharp strategic mind that had flawlessly secured some of our most lucrative and highly visible public relations campaigns over the last financial quarter. I saw so much of my younger, hungry self in her relentless drive and undeniable natural talent. She had quickly become one of my most trusted and valued executives, which was exactly why I had personally approved her massive promotion and her incredibly generous $400,000 annual salary just last month. The subject line of her email read, "Urgent time off request and exciting personal news." I clicked the message open, leaning back comfortably in my plush leather executive chair to read her words. The email was beautifully and professionally written, exactly as I always expected from her. Chloe respectfully requested to use a few days of her accumulated paid time off for the upcoming week. She enthusiastically explained that she was finally getting formally engaged this weekend. Her words practically jumped off the glowing screen with pure excitement and absolute joy. She vividly described the lavish, high-end engagement party her future in-laws were generously throwing for her at a highly exclusive local country club. She specifically mentioned how incredibly blessed she felt to be officially joining such a prominent, supportive, and exceptionally wealthy family. Reading her glowing words, I genuinely smiled. In the often cutthroat and ruthlessly competitive corporate world, it is incredibly rare to find someone who manages to successfully balance a stellar high-pressure career with genuine, fulfilling personal happiness. Chloe absolutely deserved every single ounce of joy that was currently coming her way. She had worked tirelessly for Apex Vision Group, often staying late into the night and working straight through weekends to ensure our elite clients received absolute strategic perfection. I wanted to show her exactly how much her unwavering dedication meant to me and to the entire company. I immediately hit the reply button and began to type. I typed out a warm, genuinely heartfelt message officially approving her time off request without a single second of hesitation. I told her to completely disconnect from all work emails and simply enjoy her beautiful celebration. But I certainly did not stop there. At Apex Vision Group, we firmly believe in financially rewarding fierce loyalty and exceptional performance. I securely logged into the highly encrypted corporate payroll portal and pulled up Chloe's detailed employee profile. With a few quick, highly decisive keystrokes, I explicitly authorized a special one-time corporate wedding bonus to be deposited directly into her primary bank account by the next morning. The authorized amount was exactly $20,000. It was a very substantial monetary gift, but for a top-tier executive like Chloe, who actively brought millions into the firm, it was simply standard operating procedure. I genuinely wanted her to use the generous funds for an incredible, unforgettable luxury honeymoon, or perhaps to purchase a stunning designer wedding gown without ever having to worry about the cost. I completely closed the payroll portal, returned to my email window, and firmly clicked send. The digital message vanished instantly into cyberspace, directly carrying my generous financial blessing to my absolute favorite executive employee. I calmly closed my laptop, walked back over to the towering glass windows, and looked out over the glittering city lights, feeling a profound and deep sense of personal peace. I was completely and blissfully unaware that the brilliant, wonderful young woman I had just rewarded was actively planning to marry my lying, scheming, deadbeat brother. I had absolutely no idea that the $20,000 corporate bonus I just happily authorized was actively funding the exact same lavish engagement party my arrogant father had just aggressively banned me from attending. Monday morning arrived with the crisp electric energy that only a bustling corporate headquarters can generate. I stepped out of my private elevator and onto the top floor of the Apex Vision Group skyscraper, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with running my own empire. The entire executive floor was encased in floor to ceiling reinforced glass, allowing the brilliant morning sunlight to flood the sleek, ultra modern corridors. Every single surface gleamed with pristine perfection. The imported Italian marble floors reflected the expensive ambient lighting perfectly. As I walked briskly toward my corner suite, my highly trained staff offered respectful nods and polite morning greetings. There was no hesitation in their eyes, only deep professional reverence. This was my undisputed domain. I had built this thriving ecosystem from a single cramped desk in a tiny studio apartment into an international powerhouse of brand strategy and venture capital. I did not inherit a single brick of this massive building. I did not rely on a wealthy father to open prestigious doors for me, or use a family name to secure my first massive bank loan. I kicked those heavy doors down myself. I pushed open the heavy, solid mahogany doors to my massive corner office and immediately took a deep, centering breath. The comforting scent of fresh artisan espresso and expensive genuine leather always grounded my spirit. My executive assistant had already placed my morning coffee exactly in the center of my desk, right next to a neatly organized stack of complex financial reports for the upcoming quarter. I took a slow sip of the rich, dark roast and looked out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. From this incredible vantage point, the busy city looked like a vast, complex chessboard, and I was the one moving the most valuable pieces. My mind briefly flashed back to the ugly, humiliating confrontation on my father's peeling front porch just 3 days ago. The toxic memory of my younger brother snatching that expensive vintage wine and my father aggressively denying me entry to an event felt like a distant, irrelevant lifetime. I had far more important things to focus on today. We were preparing to close a massive tech startup acquisition by the end of the week, and my mind needed to be razor sharp. Right at 9 o'clock sharp, a gentle but highly enthusiastic knock echoed against my heavy office door. "Come in," I called out, my voice projecting absolute calm and unyielding authority. The door swung open quickly to reveal Chloe, my newly promoted Senior Vice President of Communications. Usually, Chloe walked into my executive office with a severe, strictly business expression, armed with complex analytics, thick media dossiers, and aggressive public relations strategies. Today, however, she was practically floating off the ground. She was absolutely glowing from the inside out, radiating a kind of pure, unfiltered joy that you simply cannot ever fake. She was wearing a stunning, flawlessly tailored emerald green pantsuit that perfectly complemented her beautiful dark skin. But the most striking detail was the massive blinding sparkle coming directly from her left hand. She carried an aura of absolute victory, looking exactly like a woman who firmly believed she had just secured the ultimate prize in life. "Good morning, Boss," Chloe sang out happily, her voice entirely devoid of its usual serious corporate edge. She confidently strode right across the spacious room and dramatically extended her left hand straight across my polished desk. I leaned forward, my eyes widening slightly in genuine appreciation of the jewelry. Resting perfectly on her delicate finger was a massive, incredibly elaborate diamond ring. It featured a very large, flawless, emerald-cut center stone surrounded by an intricate, sparkling halo of smaller diamonds, all set heavily in thick platinum. It was designed to look aggressively expensive, the exact kind of ring a man buys when he desperately wants to make a very loud public statement about his presumed wealth and his undeniable high social status in the community. "It is absolutely beautiful, Chloe," I said warmly, genuinely happy to see my absolute favorite executive experiencing such a monumental personal milestone. "Congratulations on this incredible step. It looks like you had an incredibly successful and joyous weekend." Chloe pulled her hand back, pressing it happily against her chest as she let out a bright, breathless laugh. "Oh, Simone, it was honestly the most magical weekend of my entire life," she gushed, taking a seat directly in one of the plush, custom leather guest chairs opposite my desk. "The engagement party was an absolute dream come true. His family went completely all out to make me feel welcome and cherished. The country club was absolutely gorgeous. The catered food was exquisite, and the entire atmosphere was just dripping with old money elegance and deep family tradition. I cannot even begin to thank you enough for approving my time off and for that incredibly generous corporate bonus you authorized. You seriously did not have to do that, but it made everything so much less stressful for us. I smiled politely, resting my elbows gracefully on the polished mahogany surface. You earned every single penny of it, Chloe. You are a brilliant, indispensable asset to this company, and I always make sure to take exceptional care of my top-tier people. I am just thrilled that you found someone who truly appreciates your immense value and treats you right. Tell me all about the party. Was it everything you ever hoped for? Chloe did not need to be asked twice. She eagerly unzipped her large designer tote bag and quickly pulled out her sleek silver iPad. Oh, you simply have to see the pictures, she insisted, her manicured fingers tapping rapidly against the glass screen to unlock the high-tech device. We hired one of the absolute best luxury event photographers in the city, and he sent over the raw digital proofs to my email this morning. I really want you to see the floral arrangements we chose because I actually used that incredible celebrity florist you personally recommended for our annual corporate gala last year. She leaned forward enthusiastically and proudly slid the glowing tablet directly across my desk. I picked up the heavy device, completely relaxed and unguarded, fully expecting to see a standard series of generic high society country club photos filled with wealthy strangers holding crystal champagne flutes. I looked down at the very first high-resolution photograph. It was a stunning wide-angle shot of the grand ballroom at the elite suburban country club. The massive room was literally dripping in cascading white orchids, expensive imported silk drapery, and soft amber lighting. I mentally calculated the staggering cost of those extravagant floral arrangements and the massive, intricately carved ice sculpture positioned directly in the center of the room. It was easily a $40,000 or $50,000 private event. My $20,000 corporate bonus had clearly done some very heavy lifting to bring this luxurious fantasy to life. I swiped my index finger smoothly across the glass screen to the second picture. It was a beautiful, candid shot of Chloe laughing joyously, surrounded by her own elegant, highly educated family members. Her parents looked incredibly proud, radiating the quiet, dignified confidence of true generational wealth and authentic academic achievement. They looked exactly like the kind of prominent Howard University alumni my father had jealously described. And then, with a casual, completely unsuspecting motion, I swiped my finger across the screen to reveal the third photograph. Time inside my spacious corner office completely stopped. The ambient noise of the bustling corporate floor outside my heavy door instantly faded into absolute deafening silence. All the oxygen violently rushed out of my lungs in one single invisible gasp. Staring back at me from the glowing high-definition screen beaming with an unbelievably arrogant, sickeningly smug smile was my little brother Trey. He was standing right next to Chloe, his arm wrapped tightly and possessively around her waist, looking directly into the camera lens, as if he had just successfully conquered the entire world. He was wearing the exact same cheap, poorly tailored navy blue suit he had worn when he aggressively snatched the $2,000 bottle of wine from my hands on that peeling front porch just 3 days ago. Standing directly on his other side, wearing an incredibly fake, deeply practiced smile of pious respectability, was my father Vernon. My mother was standing slightly behind them, wearing a sequined gown that looked desperately out of place, trying far too hard to look wealthy. They were posing like wealthy royalty, entirely comfortable spending the money I had unknowingly provided them. The profound irony of the entire situation hit me like a speeding freight train. I had literally bankrolled the very same lavish party I was deemed too embarrassing and poor to attend. My brilliant, highly educated, fiercely successful vice president was the wealthy prize my deadbeat family had managed to trap in their sticky, desperate web of financial deceit. A violent surge of pure burning adrenaline instantly flooded my veins. My mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour, processing the massive scope of their disgusting deception. Trey, the spoiled golden child who had never held a real job for more than 3 consecutive months, the man who confidently styled himself as a financial guru while drowning in toxic debt, was actively manipulating my top executive. He was intentionally using Chloe as a human ATM machine to fund his pathetic delusions of grandeur and elevate his social standing. And Vernon, the hypocritical former pastor obsessed with his elite image in the Black community, was fully supporting the scam, playing the role of the wealthy patriarch to secure Chloe's impressive $400,000 annual salary for their failing family estate. It took every single ounce of my fiercely honed corporate discipline to maintain my absolute composure. In the cutthroat world of venture capital, the person who reveals their emotional hand first is the person who inevitably loses the entire game. I forced my facial muscles to remain completely relaxed. I did not blink rapidly. I did not let my jaw clench. I simply stared at the digital image, my dark eyes turning into cold, unreadable obsidian. I carefully controlled my breathing, ensuring my chest rose and fell in a slow, steady, totally unbothered rhythm. I slowly looked up from the glowing screen, meeting Chloe's bright, expectant eyes. She was waiting eagerly for my glowing praise, completely oblivious to the dangerous financial predator she had just proudly presented to me. I handed the iPad back across the mahogany desk with a smooth, completely steady hand. I offered her a polite, deeply analytical smile, the kind of smile I use right before I systematically dismantle a rival executive in a high-stakes boardroom negotiation. "He looks incredibly familiar," I said gently, my voice smooth as silk and cold as absolute ice. "What exactly does your new fiancé do for a living, Chloe?" Chloe's eyes lit up even brighter at my question, completely misreading my icy composure for genuine professional interest. "Oh, Trey is absolutely brilliant, Simone." She began, her voice practically vibrating with pride and absolute adoration. "He is an independent cryptocurrency consultant and a rising real estate mogul here in Atlanta. He actually runs his own boutique investment firm. He specializes in identifying undervalued commercial properties and leveraging digital assets to secure massive development loans. He has this incredible vision for urban revitalization that honestly reminds me a lot of the aggressive growth strategies we use right here at Apex Vision Group. He is always talking about market disruption and creating true generational wealth." She paused to take a quick breath, her smile widening. "He is so driven and passionate about building a legacy. I think that is what initially drew me to him so strongly. We both have this intense desire to build something massive from the ground up and leave a permanent mark on the city." I kept my face perfectly still, though a sharp, bitter laugh threatened to tear its way up my throat. A cryptocurrency consultant and a real estate mogul. The sheer audacity of the lie was almost breathtaking. My little brother barely passed high school math and had consistently failed out of 3 separate community colleges before officially giving up on formal education altogether. His entire working history consisted of short-lived stints at luxury car dealerships, where he spent more time taking selfies with the expensive inventory than actually selling any vehicles. His so-called boutique investment firm was undoubtedly just a fancy social media page filled with stolen stock photos of luxury mansions and vaguely inspirational quotes about grinding and hustling. Trey did not know the first thing about commercial property valuation or digital asset leverage. He only knew how to expertly leverage his good looks and our father's fading community reputation to manipulate smart, successful women into paying for his expensive dinners and tailored suits. It was deeply disturbing to watch Chloe, a woman whose entire career was built on identifying public relations risks and sniffing out corporate fraud, sit across from me and regurgitate my brother's pathetic elevator pitch with such profound sincerity. Love had completely blinded my top executive. "That sounds incredibly ambitious," I replied smoothly, leaning back in my heavy leather chair and crossing my legs. "It takes a very specific kind of highly disciplined individual to successfully navigate both the volatile crypto markets and the complex commercial real estate sector simultaneously." Has he recently closed any major acquisitions that I might have read about in the local financial journals? I asked the question innocently, knowing full well that Trey's name had never appeared in any legitimate publication unless it was a local court summons for unpaid parking tickets. Chloe waved her hand dismissively, completely unbothered by my probing question. "Oh, he prefers to operate very quietly right now," she explained eagerly. "He says real wealth whispers while fake wealth screams. He is currently keeping a very low profile while he finalizes the massive paperwork for our absolute biggest joint venture yet." She leaned closer to my desk, her voice dropping to an excited conspiratorial whisper, clearly eager to share her most exciting news with her trusted mentor. "Simone, you are not going to believe the incredible wedding present his family is giving us. His father, Vernon, is gifting us an entire commercial property right in the heart of the downtown business district to officially kickstart our joint real estate portfolio." I allowed a perfectly measured expression of mild surprise to cross my face. "Is that right?" I murmured softly, mentally preparing myself for the next layer of their elaborate deception. An entire commercial property downtown is quite a substantial foundation for a newly married couple. "It is a $5 million building," Chloe confirmed, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound gratitude and lingering disbelief. "Can you even imagine that level of generosity?" Vernon is a highly respected former pastor and a major community leader, but he has also been quietly acquiring premium real estate for decades. He told us at the party that he wants Trey and me to renovate the building and turn it into a high-end tech incubator. He said he considers my high corporate salary and my intense business acumen to be the perfect match for Trey's raw entrepreneurial vision. He is literally handing us the keys to our future empire. They are just such an incredibly supportive and generous family. They have welcomed me with completely open arms and have made me feel like I am already a vital part of their prestigious legacy. My internal monologue was screaming. I carefully picked up my espresso cup, using the motion to hide the dangerous clenching of my jaw. A $5 million commercial property. The sheer scale of their delusion was staggering. I knew for an absolute fact that Vernon had not had two nickels to rub together since his church congregation massively shrank 5 long years ago. When I was a teenager, Vernon had foolishly squandered thousands of dollars of church funds on ridiculous luxury cars and expensive tailored suits to maintain his beloved image as the city's most blessed and prosperous spiritual leader. When the congregation finally caught on to his rampant financial mismanagement, they slowly stopped attending, taking their crucial weekly tithes and generous offerings with them. Vernon was quietly forced into early retirement to avoid a massive public scandal. He had been drowning in aggressive debt ever since desperately taking out a string of high-interest second mortgages just to keep up the peeling facade of our suburban colonial house. The idea that this deeply indebted, image-obsessed man possessed a hidden $5 million commercial asset to casually hand over as a wedding gift was scientifically impossible. The incredibly dark, twisted reality of the situation suddenly clicked into place with terrifying clarity. They did not have a building. They did not have a portfolio. They had an impending financial collapse, and Chloe was their designated savior. Vernon and Trey had clearly looked at Chloe's flawless credit score, her prestigious corporate title, and her massive $400,000 annual salary, and they saw a human lifeboat. They were heavily manipulating her with promises of fake generational wealth so she would eagerly sign her name onto massive joint loans and take on their toxic hidden debts. They were going to drain her impressive bank accounts dry to fund Trey's fake mogul lifestyle and save Vernon from total financial ruin. They were using the exact same playbook they had always used, exploiting the hard work of a successful Black woman to prop up the fragile, unearned egos of the men in the family. It made me absolutely sick to my stomach. I felt a fierce, incredibly protective instinct rise up in my chest. Chloe was my employee. She was my protégé. I had personally mentored her and guided her rapid ascent up the corporate ladder. I was absolutely not going to sit back and watch my parasitic family completely destroy her bright future. "That is certainly a very impressive and aggressive way to start a marriage," I said carefully, setting my espresso cup back down on the matching ceramic saucer. It is always fascinating to hear about families who are so heavily invested in their children's financial success. It sounds like Trey has had a very privileged and deeply supported upbringing. It is truly remarkable that he managed to turn all that early family support into such a thriving independent career. Chloe smiled softly, though a brief shadow of sympathy quickly crossed her bright face. He really is amazing, she agreed warmly. But honestly, his family has definitely been through their fair share of painful emotional struggles. It has not always been completely perfect for them. Trey was actually telling me last night about his older sister. It is a really tragic situation, honestly. I raised a single perfectly sculpted eyebrow, keeping my posture entirely relaxed. Oh, I murmured softly. He has an older sister. He never mentioned her in any of the brief conversations you and I have had about your new extended family. Chloe sighed, shaking her head sadly, as if she was relaying a deeply heartbreaking tragedy. Yes, but they do not speak to her anymore. Trey says she is a deeply bitter, insanely jealous, and completely broke college dropout who just vanished from their lives years ago, according to Trey. She was incredibly toxic and constantly tried to tear him down because she was so envious of his natural ambition and his close relationship with their father. She made some really terrible life choices, refused to accept any of their loving help, and eventually just abandoned the family entirely. He says she is probably struggling to survive somewhere, completely consumed by her own toxic negativity. I stared directly at Chloe, absorbing the incredible weight of my brother's lies. I was the jealous, broke dropout. I was the toxic sister who had to be cut out like a cancer so their precious family could supposedly thrive. They had completely rewritten history to make me the pathetic villain of their story, all while eagerly cashing the massive corporate bonus check I had just unknowingly provided them. But you know what I love most about Trey? Chloe continued, her voice softening with profound affection. Despite everything she put them through, he does not harbor any real hatred toward her. Trey says his sister is a jealous, broke dropout who vanished, but he is too kind-hearted to hold a grudge. I let the absolute silence stretch out for a few long, heavy seconds. The sheer audacity of his fabricated narrative was almost poetic in its complete departure from reality. I slowly picked up my espresso cup once more, the delicate porcelain feeling surprisingly cool against my warm fingers. I took a very slow, deliberate sip of the dark, bitter liquid, letting the complex flavors coat my tongue as I finalized my battle plan. The trap was already beginning to take shape in my mind. "Is that so?" I said quietly, my voice barely above a soft whisper, yet carrying a weight that made the air in the room suddenly feel incredibly heavy. I placed the cup down with a very soft, definitive click against the saucer. "I think I need to meet this remarkable young man." Chloe beamed, completely thrilled by my apparent interest. "I would love that, Simone. I will arrange a time for you to meet him properly after the wedding madness settles down." She stood up, gathered her designer tote bag, and walked out of my office, leaving a trail of expensive floral perfume in her wake. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut securely behind her. The moment the brass latch engaged, my polite professional smile vanished entirely. I stood up from my leather executive chair and walked swiftly to the door, turning the deadbolt until it locked with a satisfying, heavy thud. I was no longer just the supportive chief executive officer of Apex Vision Group. I was a woman preparing for absolute war. I walked back to my desk, my mind calculating the horrific variables of my family's deception. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a highly secure encrypted secondary cell phone that I use strictly for extremely sensitive corporate acquisitions and deeply private legal matters. I scrolled past the contacts of high-profile venture capitalists and influential politicians until I found the specific name I needed: Marcus Vance. Marcus was not just a lawyer. He was the senior managing partner of the most ruthless private wealth management and corporate intelligence firm in the entire state of Georgia. He was the man I paid an incredibly exorbitant retainer to ensure that Apex Vision Group never entered a blind deal and that my personal assets remained completely untouchable. I tapped his name and held the sleek device to my ear, listening to the secure line connect. Simone Marcus answered smoothly on the second ring, his deep voice radiating calm professional efficiency. "To what do I owe the pleasure on a Monday morning?" Are we finally executing the hostile takeover of that tech firm in Austin? No, Marcus, I replied, my voice hard and entirely devoid of any pleasantries. We are executing a deep dive on a personal matter. I need you to run a comprehensive scorched earth financial background check on 2 individuals here in Atlanta. And I need the absolute raw data sent to my encrypted server before I leave this office for lunch today. Consider it done, Marcus said, instantly matching my serious tone. Give me the names and any identifying details you have. The first target is Vernon Hayes, I instructed, pacing slowly across the thick, custom-woven carpet of my office. He is a former pastor who resides in the northern suburbs. The second target is his son, Trey Hayes. I need every single piece of financial paper attached to their social security numbers. I want to see their credit scores, their outstanding loan balances, their tax histories, and any pending civil litigation. I need to know about any secret bank accounts, shell companies, or hidden liabilities. I want to know what they bought for breakfast this morning if they used a credit card to pay for it. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second, his sharp legal mind clearly recognizing the last name. Hayes. Simone, are these individuals related to you? Biologically, yes, I stated coldly, staring out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. But right now they are an active and immediate threat to one of my top-tier executive employees. They are attempting to orchestrate a massive financial fraud, using my company's payroll as their primary collateral. I need the absolute proof to surgically dismantle their operation before they can legally bind my employee to their toxic debt. Understood, Marcus replied, his tone shifting into pure tactical execution. My intelligence team is already running the preliminary scans through the federal and state databases. If they have even a single unpaid parking ticket or a slightly overdue utility bill, it will be in the dossier. I will have the complete files compiled and uploaded to your secure server within the next 2 hours. Make it 1 hour, Marcus, I demanded quietly, cutting the connection before he could even agree. I tossed the encrypted phone back onto my polished desk and let out a long, slow breath. The sheer audacity of their plan was still burning in the back of my throat like cheap whiskey. They honestly thought they could waltz into my city, manipulate a brilliant woman who worked directly under my protection, and steal the wealth that my company provided her. They thought they were the smartest people in the room, completely unaware that they had just walked straight into the lion's den. For the next hour, I forcefully pushed the bubbling rage down into a tight, highly controlled compartment in my mind, and focused entirely on my corporate duties. I reviewed complex quarterly earnings reports, approved a multi-million-dollar marketing budget for a new international client, and fired off dozens of rapid emails to my department heads. Right at 11:15, a sharp, distinct chime echoed from my secure laptop. A highly encrypted file folder had just populated on my private server sent directly from Marcus. The file name was simply titled Project Hayes. I closed my office blinds with a quick touch of a button on my desk console, plunging the room into cool, deliberate shadows. I opened the encrypted folder, typed in my complex alphanumeric passcode, and the screen instantly filled with heavily redacted financial documents, deep bank statements, and comprehensive legal filings. I was finally looking at the raw, unfiltered truth behind the grand illusion of the Hayes family legacy. I clicked on Trey's comprehensive dossier first. The numbers staring back at me were a horrific, bleeding financial bloodbath. My little brother, the so-called rising real estate mogul and elite cryptocurrency consultant, had a credit score hovering dangerously close to 500. He had absolutely zero liquid assets, no registered investment portfolios, and no legitimate stream of taxable income reported in the last 3 years. What he did have was an incredibly staggering mountain of toxic high-interest debt. He had maxed out 6 different premium credit cards, racking up exactly $200,000 in consumer debt. The itemized statements showed a pathetic, desperate pattern of behavior. He was buying expensive tailored suits, booking lavish tables at exclusive high-end nightclubs, and renting luxury vehicles just to maintain his fake wealthy persona on social media. Furthermore, the pristine Mercedes-Benz he had been proudly driving around the city for the past 6 months was not a symbol of his supposed business success. According to the glaring red flag on page 4 of the legal report, the vehicle had been aggressively repossessed by a highly aggressive collection agency just 2 weeks ago after he missed 4 consecutive monthly lease payments. He was quite literally a walking, breathing financial black hole, entirely incapable of supporting himself, let alone actively managing a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate portfolio. He was a complete fraud, surviving solely on his fading good looks and his dangerous ability to manipulate the generous women around him. I closed Trey's pathetic file and opened the massive digital folder belonging to Vernon. I already knew my father was struggling, but the official legal documents painted a picture of absolute terrifying devastation. Exactly 3 months ago, Vernon had secretly filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in federal court. His sprawling suburban colonial house, the absolute pride and joy of his entire fake elite existence, was heavily underwater. He had taken out 3 separate high-interest mortgages on the property just to keep up his country club memberships and maintain his outward appearance of generational wealth. The bank was actively preparing to seize the house, his luxury vehicles were heavily leveraged, and his credit was completely destroyed. But the absolute crowning jewel of this entire disgusting charade was hidden on page 12 of Vernon's asset disclosure forms. Chloe had proudly bragged about a $5 million commercial property downtown that Vernon was supposedly gifting them as a grand wedding present to start their joint empire. I scrolled down to the commercial real estate listings associated with his name. There was absolutely nothing. He owned no commercial real estate whatsoever. So where did the specific $5 million figure come from? I quickly ran a cross-reference search through the municipal property records using the exact address Chloe had briefly mentioned during her excited rambling. The digital system loaded for 3 seconds before displaying the legal owner of the downtown property. It was proudly registered to an independent limited liability company named Vanguard Holdings. A very cold, deeply satisfying smile slowly spread across my face as I stared directly at the screen. Vanguard Holdings was not some random real estate conglomerate. It was a private subsidiary shell company that I had personally created 2 years ago. The $5 million building my father was promising to give my brilliant vice president of communications was actually owned entirely by me. The sheer psychological sickness of their plan was now laid completely bare in front of me. Vernon and Trey had somehow identified that specific premium building and used its prestigious address to completely dazzle Chloe, lying boldly to her face to convince her that they possessed immense generational wealth. They knew perfectly well that Chloe was making a massive $400,000 annual salary right here at Apex Vision Group. They did not love her. They did not respect her brilliant mind or her beautiful spirit. Trey was only marrying her because he desperately needed a wealthy woman with a flawless credit score to blindly co-sign his massive incoming debt consolidation loans. They were actively setting her up to be the permanent financial savior for their entire bankrupt family. They were going to use my absolute best employee as their own personal human ATM machine. I carefully closed the encrypted folders, my mind operating with the cold, absolute precision of a seasoned sniper. The truth was fully documented, legally verified, and sitting securely on my private server. The trap was officially set. My parasitic family had absolutely no idea who they were truly dealing with. They thought they were playing a simple game of social manipulation, but they had just walked directly onto my personal chessboard. And in my corporate empire, I never lose. 2 days passed in a blur of high-stakes negotiations and endless corporate meetings. It was now Wednesday morning, and the heavy anticipation of the impending collision was practically humming under my skin. I was sitting in a strategy meeting with my top executive team, finalizing the launch sequence for a new global marketing campaign. Chloe was sitting to my immediate right, looking incredibly vibrant and entirely focused on the detailed presentation. As we wrapped up the final agenda items, she leaned over to me with a bright, apologetic smile. "Simone," she whispered quietly, "I am going to skip the catered team lunch today. Trey is actually dropping by the building to bring me a surprise lunch and take me out for a quick hour." He texted me a few minutes ago saying he wanted to see my office building in person since we are finalizing our wedding guest list this afternoon. I kept my expression completely neutral, though my pulse immediately quickened with a sharp thrill of pure adrenaline. This was it. The absolute perfect opportunity had just fallen directly into my lap. I did not need to arrange an awkward dinner or force a hostile meeting at their country club. My pathetic little brother was willingly walking straight through the heavily fortified front doors of my own personal empire. I took a moment to mentally rehearse the impending confrontation. In the cutthroat world of venture capital, timing is absolutely everything. You never strike when your opponent is expecting it. You wait until they feel incredibly powerful, until their arrogance blinds them to their own fatal vulnerabilities, and then you strike with absolute devastating precision. My brother had spent his entire pathetic life believing he was fundamentally superior to me, simply because he was the chosen golden son. Today I was going to completely dismantle that ridiculous delusion. "Enjoy your lunch, Chloe," I replied smoothly, gathering my leather-bound folders from the massive boardroom table. It is always nice to break up the busy workday with someone you love. I watched her pack up her laptop and head toward the executive elevators, completely unaware of the massive storm that was about to violently touch down in our lobby. The moment she was out of sight, I turned to my executive assistant. "Cancel my 12:00 conference call," I instructed calmly. "I need to spend the next hour down in the main lobby. I have some architectural expansion plans to review with the building management team, and I want to do it on the ground floor today." I rode my private glass elevator down all 40 floors, silently watching the sprawling city of Atlanta rush past me. The main lobby of the Apex Vision Group headquarters was not just a simple reception area. It was a massive, deliberately intimidating architectural statement designed specifically to project immense wealth and absolute corporate dominance. The ceiling stretched 3 stories high, supported by towering pillars of imported white marble. The floor was a flawless expanse of polished dark granite that mirrored the expensive ambient lighting perfectly. Flanking the massive revolving glass doors were highly trained, visibly armed private security guards wearing immaculate dark suits. They were hand-picked professionals who reported directly and exclusively to me. In the exact center of the sprawling space was a sleek, high-end espresso bar, crafted from brushed steel and dark mahogany, serving rare imported roasts to my elite staff and our wealthy visiting clients. It was an environment that demanded immediate respect from the very moment you crossed the threshold. I walked over to the espresso bar and ordered a simple black coffee. The barista, recognizing me, instantly rushed to prepare my drink with deep, respectful urgency. I took my cup and moved to a tall marble high-top table positioned perfectly in the center of the lobby, offering an unobstructed view of both the main entrance and the primary elevator banks. I unrolled a large set of highly detailed architectural blueprints across the table, making myself look intensely busy. I was wearing a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit today. It was undeniably expensive, but to an untrained, ignorant eye like my brother's, it could easily be mistaken for the standard uniform of a mid-level corporate drone or an upscale building manager. I took a slow sip of my coffee, keeping my eyes cast downward at the blueprints while my peripheral vision remained locked tightly on the heavy revolving glass doors. The trap was perfectly set. The bait was actively moving into position. Now, all I had to do was patiently wait for the rat to arrive. At exactly 12:15, the heavy glass doors slowly revolved. I did not need to look up to know it was him. I could practically feel the overwhelming wave of cheap cologne and unearned arrogance entering my magnificent building. I slightly shifted my gaze, watching Trey strut confidently into the massive lobby. He was wearing another tragically cheap, ill-fitting suit, this one a shiny light gray that clearly screamed discount rack. In his right hand, he was proudly holding a pathetic bouquet of brightly colored grocery store flowers, still wrapped in cheap plastic that crinkled loudly with every single step he took. He paused right in the center of the marble floor, looking up at the towering ceiling and the armed security guards with wide, greedy eyes. He puffed out his chest aggressively, attempting to project the fake aura of a powerful real estate mogul casually inspecting a potential new acquisition. He looked completely ridiculous, like a little boy playing an adult game of dress-up in a complex world he could not even begin to comprehend or afford. He stood near the main reception desk, clearly waiting for Chloe to come down from the executive suites. He casually adjusted his fake designer tie and flashed a sleazy, highly practiced smile at the young female receptionist behind the massive granite counter. She offered him a polite, entirely professional nod, completely immune to his pathetic attempts at shallow charm. Trey shifted his weight. Clearly annoyed that his supposed extreme wealth and magnetic charisma were not commanding the immediate groveling respect he firmly felt he deserved. He began to slowly pace the lobby floor critically, surveying the bustling crowds of highly paid executives and sharp venture capitalists moving purposefully through the grand space. He was actively trying to look like he belonged among them. But his nervous energy and cheap scuffed shoes gave him away instantly. He was a complete imposter standing right in the heart of my financial fortress, totally blind to the fact that every single inch of marble he was stepping on was legally owned by the exact same sister he had just ruthlessly mocked. A soft musical chime echoed loudly through the busy lobby as the designated executive elevator reached the ground floor. The heavy steel doors slid open, and Chloe stepped out looking absolutely stunning in her sharp professional attire. Her face lit up with genuine happiness the moment she spotted Trey waiting for her. She began walking briskly across the expansive granite floor, completely focused on the manipulative man she mistakenly believed was her perfect future husband. Trey saw her approaching and immediately turned to meet her halfway, proudly holding out the cheap plastic-wrapped flowers like they were a priceless athletic trophy. As he turned his entire body toward the elevators, his wandering gaze swept casually across the sleek espresso bar. His eyes carelessly brushed past the busy baristas, past the armed security guards, and finally landed directly on the tall marble table where I was quietly standing. I did not move a single muscle. I kept my head slightly bowed, my eyes fixed intently on the complex architectural blueprints spread out before me, but I was closely watching his exact reaction through the clear reflection in the polished marble pillar right next to me. I saw the exact second his small brain registered my familiar face. He physically stopped walking for a fraction of a second, his cheap dress shoes skidding slightly on the highly polished floor. His eyes widened in massive, unfiltered shock. He clearly could not comprehend how the broke, embarrassing sister he had aggressively banned from his lavish country club party was currently standing inside the most exclusive high-security corporate headquarters in the entire city of Atlanta. He stared at me, his mind desperately trying to process the impossible visual information before him. And then right on cue, his pathetic ego took total control of his limited cognitive functions. I watched his initial shock rapidly melt away entirely, replaced by a nasty, incredibly arrogant smirk that aggressively twisted his handsome features. He looked at my simple coffee cup, my charcoal suit, and the large rolls of paper spread across my table. His twisted, delusional brain immediately connected the completely wrong dots. He honestly thought I was working a minimum wage job as a low-level architectural clerk, or perhaps a basic building manager for the massive corporate entity that employed his wealthy fiancée. He genuinely believed that my strict father's harsh predictions had finally come true. He thought I was barely scraping by, fetching coffee and reviewing basic floor plans for the real executives who actually ran the magnificent building. The arrogant smirk on his face grew significantly wider, displaying a sickening level of toxic, unearned confidence. He puffed out his chest even further, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. He fully believed he had just stumbled upon the absolute perfect opportunity to publicly humiliate me in front of Chloe and absolutely ruin my miserable little workday. Every single step he took across that polished granite floor was a step deeper into my perfectly constructed trap. He gripped the cheap flowers tighter in his right hand, completely ignoring Chloe, who had suddenly stopped walking and was now watching him with a highly confused expression on her face. She could not understand why her loving fiancé was suddenly storming toward a random architectural table instead of happily greeting her. I slowly took another measured sip of my black coffee, feeling the warm liquid slide down my throat. The ambient noise of the busy lobby seemed to fade completely away, leaving only the sharp, distinct clicking sound of his cheap shoes marching purposefully toward my absolute destruction. He thought he was walking over to put a broke failure of a sister firmly in her proper place. He had absolutely no idea he was walking directly into a corporate slaughterhouse. He sharply changed his immediate trajectory, marching straight toward my table with the clear, undeniable intent to embarrass me in my supposedly new minimum wage job. Trey reached his left hand back and abruptly grabbed Chloe by the wrist. He pulled her along as he aggressively closed the distance between us. Chloe stumbled slightly in designer heels, clearly caught off guard by his sudden change in direction and his rough physical demeanor. She looked incredibly confused, her eyes darting from his determined face to the architectural blueprints spread out across my marble table. Trey did not care about her discomfort. He was entirely focused on his desperate need to exert dominance over the sister he despised. His cheap leather shoes slapped loudly against the polished granite floor, echoing through the cavernous lobby and drawing the annoyed attention of several passing executives. He marched with the exaggerated swagger of a man who believed he owned the entire world, completely oblivious to the undeniable fact that he was walking directly into a perfectly laid silent corporate trap now. He finally reached my high-top table, stopping so abruptly that Chloe nearly crashed directly into his back. Trey slammed his free hand down flat onto the polished marble surface, deliberately crumpling the edge of my expensive architectural blueprints. The aggressive sound cracked through the quiet hum of the corporate lobby like a physical whip. Several highly paid venture capitalists standing near the elevator banks immediately stopped their hushed conversations and turned their heads to watch the unfolding drama. Trey completely ignored them. He leaned his upper body aggressively across the table, invading my personal space with a sickening wave of cheap discount cologne and stale breath. He looked down at my simple black coffee cup and the large rolls of paper, his eyes gleaming with malicious, unfiltered joy. He thought he had finally caught me at my absolute lowest point in life, struggling to barely survive the passing day. "What are you doing here?" He practically shouted, his loud voice completely devoid of any basic social grace or indoor volume control. "Are you applying for a job, Simone? Or did they actually hire you to hold the paper flat for the real professionals?" He let out a harsh, incredibly ugly laugh that grated against my ears. It was the exact same cruel laugh he used when we were children, the laugh that always preceded one of his vicious lies or manipulative tantrums. I did not move a single muscle. I did not break eye contact. I simply stared back at him with the cold, unblinking intensity of an apex predator watching a wounded animal stumble blindly into its territory. My absolute silence seemed to confuse him for a fraction of a second, but his bloated ego quickly overrode his basic common sense, blinding him to the obvious danger entirely. Trey roughly yanked Chloe forward by her arm, forcing her to stand directly beside him at the marble table. Chloe looked absolutely mortified by his loud, aggressive behavior in her professional workplace. She kept her eyes cast downward, desperately trying to avoid drawing any more attention from the surrounding executives. "Chloe, babe, look at this," Trey announced loudly. Trey announced, pointing a stiff finger directly at my face. "This right here is the broke sister I told you about. The one who dropped out of college and completely ruined her life. I guess she finally crawled out of whatever miserable hole she was hiding in." He looked around the lobby, silently demanding an audience for his grand performance. I kept my face perfectly still, my dark eyes shifting briefly from his flushed, arrogant face to Chloe. She still had not looked up to see exactly who he was actively insulting right now. "Tell your building security to escort her out of here right now," Trey demanded, his voice echoing loudly off the towering marble pillars. "She is probably just here to beg for loose change or steal corporate secrets. We cannot have trash like this wandering around your nice office building, babe. It is a bad look for our brand." The absolute sheer audacity of his words hung heavily in the chilled, air-conditioned air of the massive lobby. He actually believed he possessed the authority to dictate who was allowed inside my global headquarters. He was using his fake connection to my vice president of communications as a pathetic weapon against me, completely unaware that he was holding a loaded gun directly to his own head. I felt a deep, profound sense of pity for the miserable man standing before me. He was truly a spectacular fool pretending to rule here. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or scramble to defend my honor against his pathetic, baseless accusations. In the ruthless world of high-stakes venture capital, true power never needs to scream or throw a childish public temper tantrum. True power is absolute terrifying stillness. I slowly reached out with my right hand and grasped the delicate ceramic handle of my black coffee cup. I lifted it slightly, taking one final deliberate sip of the dark liquid, holding his furious gaze the entire time. Then, with a smooth, perfectly controlled motion, I placed the cup back down onto the matching saucer. The soft, sharp clink of the porcelain meeting the ceramic echoed loudly in the sudden tense silence that had completely enveloped our immediate section of the sprawling lobby. It was the sound of a heavy steel trap finally snapping completely shut around his exposed ankle. The moment my coffee cup touched the saucer, the atmosphere in the room violently shifted. The armed private security guards stationed by the main revolving glass doors had been watching the entire interaction with sharp, highly trained eyes. They recognized the aggressive physical posture, the loud, threatening tone of voice, and the undeniable disrespect directed specifically at their absolute highest priority principal. Three massive, broad-shouldered men wearing immaculate dark suits and discreet earpieces instantly stepped forward from their assigned posts. They moved with terrifying synchronized speed across the polished granite floor. Their heavy tactical boots made absolutely no sound as they rapidly closed the distance. Trey saw them approaching out of the corner of his eye and immediately puffed his chest out even further, sporting a sickeningly triumphant smile. He honestly thought his loud, obnoxious command was actually being obeyed by the building security team to remove me now. "Yes, exactly," Trey said loudly, gesturing wildly toward me as the three massive guards approached our marble table. "Grab this crazy woman and throw her out onto the street where she belongs. She is harassing my fiancé." The lead security guard, a towering man named Marcus with cold eyes and a military background, did not even glance in my direction. He completely bypassed my side of the table and stepped directly into Trey's personal space, aggressively crowding the much smaller, weaker man. The second and third guards immediately flanked Marcus, forming an impenetrable, terrifying wall of solid muscle directly between Trey and myself. They were not looking at me. They were glaring down at Trey with a level of intense, barely contained professional hostility that made the surrounding executives physically take a step back. The triumphant smile on Trey's face instantly vanished, replaced by massive confusion and a sudden fear. "Excuse me," Trey stammered, taking a quick frightened step backward as the lead guard loomed ominously over him. "What are you doing? I told you to grab her, not me. She is the one who does not belong here. My fiancé is a senior executive in this building. Tell them, Chloe. Tell them who you are." He reached out and aggressively grabbed Chloe by the shoulder, roughly pulling her forward to act as his personal human shield. The physical contact was jarring, and it finally snapped Chloe out of her frozen state of profound public mortification. She took a deep, shaky breath and slowly lifted her head, her eyes reluctantly traveling upward to apologize to the random architectural clerk her lunatic fiancé had just verbally assaulted. But she did not see a random clerk. Her eyes slowly traveled up the sharply tailored charcoal gray fabric of my very expensive suit. Chloe recognized the immaculate stitching and the flawless structured cut of the fabric instantly. It was a custom Tom Ford suit, a piece of clothing that cost more than Trey's entire fabricated real estate portfolio. Her wide, panicked eyes slowly traveled higher, moving past the expensive silk lapels, past my perfectly calm, unbothered posture until they finally locked directly with my cold, dark eyes. The exact moment her brain processed my familiar face, all the blood violently drained from her beautiful features. Her rich, dark skin visibly paled, turning a sickly ashen gray color in the bright lobby lighting. Her jaw dropped open slightly, her perfectly applied lipstick parting in an expression of absolute, unadulterated horror. She looked from my calm, authoritative face down to the aggressive security guards, who were standing in a highly protective formation strictly around me. Chloe stammers the terrified words completely caught in her throat. The silence in the massive corporate lobby was absolutely deafening. It was not just a simple pause in conversation. It was the heavy, suffocating kind of silence that instantly follows a massive car crash before anyone even dares to breathe. Every single highly paid executive, every visiting tech investor, and every busy assistant standing within a 50-foot radius had completely frozen in their tracks. The ambient hum of the espresso bar machinery abruptly shut off. The entire room was watching us, completely captivated by the intense psychological warfare unfolding right in the center of the polished granite floor. Trey still had his aggressive hand wrapped tightly around Chloe's delicate shoulder, but his grip was slowly loosening as the deeply disturbing reality of the situation began to violently crash down over him. He looked from the three massive, heavily armed security guards, forming an impenetrable human wall around me, back to the terrified face of his wealthy fiancé. He was waiting for Chloe to assert her corporate dominance, fire the guards, and humiliate me, just like he ordered. He was waiting for a rescue that was never going to come. Chloe swallowed hard, her throat visibly working as she desperately tried to force oxygen back into her paralyzed lungs. She looked at me, her brilliant mind rapidly connecting the devastating dots. My first name was Simone. I was a self-made woman who had built an empire from absolutely nothing. I had actively avoided talking about my estranged family during our private mentoring sessions, and now the toxic, broke, jealous sister, her lying fiancé had relentlessly complained about, was standing right in front of her wearing a custom Tom Ford suit and commanding an elite private security force. The profound horror of her realization was incredibly painful to witness. She finally found her voice, though it emerged as a fragile, trembling whisper that barely carried across the polished marble table. "No, honey," she breathed out. Her wide eyes locked directly onto Trey's suddenly confused face. "She is not a clerk. She is my boss. Simone is the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Vision Group." The incredibly simple, factual words hung in the chilled air, conditioning like a lethal execution order. I watched Trey process the impossible information. It was like watching a massive computer server experience a catastrophic system failure in real time. His jaw literally dropped open, hanging slack in an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, his entire physical posture, which had been puffed up with toxic, unearned arrogance just 10 seconds ago, instantly collapsed inwards. All the blood rushed violently out of his face, leaving him looking pale and physically ill. His fingers went completely numb, losing their tight grip on the cheap grocery store flowers he had brought to impress my vice president. The brightly colored bouquet slipped right out of his hand, falling through the tense air and hitting the polished Italian marble floor with a pathetic, crinkling slap. The cheap plastic wrapping split slightly open, spilling a few bruised flower petals onto the pristine granite. It was a perfectly fitting visual metaphor for his completely shattered, pathetic ego. I decided it was finally time to step completely out of the shadows and claim my absolute victory. I slowly stepped around the tall marble table, leaving the architectural blueprints behind. The three massive security guards immediately parted like the Red Sea, smoothly creating a wide, highly respectful path for me to walk through. I stopped just 2 feet away from my trembling little brother. I slowly raised my left arm deliberately, shooting my expensive silk cuff to reveal the custom diamond Rolex gleaming brightly on my wrist. I adjusted the heavy platinum watch face with calm, practiced precision, letting the expensive diamonds catch the bright lobby lighting. The simple, incredibly wealthy gesture seemed to completely paralyze him. He could not look away from the undeniable proof of my massive success. "Hello, little brother," I said smoothly, my voice projecting clearly across the silent lobby with absolute, unyielding authority. "It has been a very long time." I slowly looked him up and down, making sure my eyes lingered critically on the poorly stitched seams of his cheap discount suit. "You look exactly the same as you did on the front porch." I tilted my head slightly, offering him a sharp, razor-thin smile that contained absolutely zero warmth. "I see you thoroughly enjoyed the $20,000 corporate bonus I personally approved for your lavish engagement party this past weekend." The collective gasp from the surrounding executives was completely audible. Chloe physically staggered backward, her high heels clicking sharply against the granite as if I had just physically struck her in the chest. She clutched her expensive designer handbag tightly to her stomach, her eyes darting frantically between me and the pathetic man she had almost married. The horrific financial reality was hitting her with the force of a speeding train. The beautiful floral arrangements, the expensive catered food, the exclusive country club venue. All of it was actively paid for by the generous corporate bonus I had given her, which she had blindly handed over to my deadbeat family because they falsely claimed they had a minor cash flow issue with their massive investment accounts. She suddenly realized that she had unknowingly financed her own extravagant engagement party and that the wealthy real estate mogul she loved was nothing more than a desperate broke parasite. Trey began to actively hyperventilate. His chest heaved up and down in rapid, shallow breaths, his eyes darting around the massive lobby like a trapped rat, desperately looking for a hidden exit. The absolute sheer magnitude of his public humiliation was completely crushing him. He had walked into my global headquarters intending to aggressively embarrass a minimum wage worker, only to discover that the woman he despised actually owned the entire building, signed his fiancée's massive paychecks, and unknowingly funded the only scrap of fake prestige he had left in the world. He tried to speak. He desperately tried to formulate a clever lie or a defensive excuse, but his vocal cords completely failed him. All that came out of his mouth was a pathetic, high-pitched wheezing sound. He took a stumbling step backward, his cheap dress shoes stepping directly onto the crushed bouquet of grocery store flowers he had dropped moments ago. Simone Trey finally managed to stammer out, his voice cracking horribly. "This is all just a massive misunderstanding. I did not know this was your company. I did not mean what I said. We were just joking around." I completely ignored his pathetic, scrambling attempt at an apology. In the high-stakes corporate world, you never negotiate with a desperate, cornered liar in a public setting. You remove them from the general audience, isolate them completely, and systematically break down their remaining defenses behind closed, soundproof doors. I turned my attention away from his sweating, panicked face and looked directly at the head of my elite security detail. "Escort my vice president of communications and her special guest to the primary glass-walled boardroom on the top floor," I instructed calmly, my voice completely steady and entirely devoid of any emotion. "Secure the entire executive floor. I want absolutely no interruptions for the next hour." The towering head of security gave a crisp, immediate nod, signaling the other two massive guards to instantly flank Trey on both sides. Chloe looked at me, her beautiful face a complex mask of profound embarrassment, deep professional fear, and rapidly building fury. She was a brilliant public relations expert, and she knew exactly what a disaster this truly was. "Simone, I am so incredibly sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking violently. "I had absolutely no idea. I swear to you, if I had known who he really was to you, I would have never brought him into this building." I offered her a single reassuring nod. "I know you did not know, Chloe. You are a victim of his elaborate fraud just as much as anyone else. But we are going to fix this massive liability right now." I gestured smoothly toward the private executive elevators waiting quietly at the far end of the sprawling lobby. "Go upstairs, both of you." Trey looked absolutely terrified at the prospect of being dragged up to my private executive floor. He looked like a man being actively led to the guillotine. He tried to pull his arms away from the massive security guards, but their iron grips tightened instantly, physically lifting him slightly off the polished granite floor. He had absolutely no choice but to comply. He began a slow, humiliating march across the grand lobby, closely followed by Chloe, who purposely kept a wide, disgusted distance between them. The entire crowd of elite venture capitalists and busy corporate executives watched them leave in absolute stunned silence. I picked up my black coffee cup, taking one final highly satisfying sip before gently tossing it into a nearby silver trash receptacle. I smoothed down the expensive lapels of my tailored charcoal suit, feeling the raw adrenaline coursing powerfully through my veins. The initial trap had been sprung flawlessly. The pathetic illusion of his immense wealth and unearned superiority was lying completely crushed on the lobby floor, right next to those cheap grocery store flowers. But the total destruction of my toxic family was not completely finished yet. The public humiliation was merely the opening act. The real execution was about to happen behind reinforced soundproof glass. I turned and walked slowly toward the waiting private elevator, feeling entirely calm, dangerously focused, and incredibly powerful. The steel doors slid silently open to receive me. "We are going to have a family meeting," I murmured quietly to myself as I stepped inside the elevator, the heavy doors closing firmly to shut out the rest of the world. The rapid ascent to the 40th floor took exactly 45 seconds. During that brief silent ride, I mentally prepared the heavy legal documents and the devastating financial receipts sitting securely in the manila folder on my desk. I was not just going to confront Trey about his pathetic lies. I was going to systematically dismantle his entire fake reality right in front of the brilliant woman he was actively trying to exploit. I was going to expose the $200,000 in toxic credit card debt, the humiliating car repossession, and the undeniable fact that our father was secretly filing for federal bankruptcy. By the time I was finished speaking today, there would be absolutely nothing left of his fragile ego but dust and bitter regret. The elevator chimed softly, signaling my arrival at the top floor. I stepped out onto the pristine Italian marble, the sound of my high heels echoing down the long, sunlit corridor leading directly to the primary glass boardroom. The main event was officially about to begin. The corridor was lined with modern art pieces that I had personally curated, each one a testament to the raw beauty of independent success. I walked past the sprawling floor-to-ceiling windows, glancing briefly at the bustling city of Atlanta spread out far below me. Millions of people were going about their daily lives, completely oblivious to the intense corporate execution about to take place at the very top of the skyline. As I approached the primary glass-walled boardroom, I could already see them waiting inside. The room was entirely encased in soundproof, reinforced architectural glass, designed specifically to project total transparency while maintaining absolute acoustic privacy. Inside the massive room, the tension was thick enough to cut with a steel knife. Trey was sitting rigidly in one of the plush, ergonomic leather chairs, sweating profusely through his cheap, light gray suit. He looked incredibly small, completely dwarfed by the massive, custom-built mahogany conference table that dominated the space. Chloe was standing as far away from him as physically possible. She was positioned near the massive windows, her arms crossed tightly over her chest in a highly defensive posture, glaring fiercely at the man who had just publicly humiliated her and jeopardized her entire brilliant career. The three towering security guards stood silently by the heavy glass doors, their presence a constant, terrifying reminder that Trey was no longer in control of his own fate. I placed my hand firmly on the brushed steel handle of the boardroom door, taking one last deep breath of the cool, conditioned air. I pushed the heavy door open and confidently stepped into the room. The absolute silence inside was even more profound than the silence in the lobby had been. I did not immediately sit down. I walked slowly to the head of the massive mahogany table, taking my rightful place as the absolute authority in the room. I looked directly at Trey, watching the beads of nervous sweat roll slowly down his panicked forehead. He was trapped in my world now, surrounded entirely by my wealth, my power, and my undeniable success. There was no escape. There were no parents here to blindly defend his toxic behavior or validate his ridiculous lies. There was only me, the brilliant executive he was actively trying to con, and the crushing weight of the absolute truth. The family meeting was now officially called to order. I took my seat at the head of the long table, resting my hands flat against the polished mahogany surface. The afternoon sun streamed violently through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, casting long shadows across the room. Trey shifted uncomfortably, his cheap suit clinging to his sweating body. He looked like a cornered animal searching for an exit. Chloe remained standing near the windows, her arms crossed tightly. She was breathing heavily, her eyes locked onto Trey with profound disgust and absolute disbelief. She demanded immediate clarity, and the agonizing silence in the room was pushing her over the edge. "Talk to me right now," Chloe demanded, her voice vibrating with suppressed fury. "You told me your sister was a broke dropout who ruined her own life. You told me she was desperately jealous of your massive success. Yet here she is, sitting at the head of a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm, commanding an elite security team, and wearing a suit that costs more than my entire car. Explain to me exactly what is going on here, because if you lie to me one more time, I am walking out that door." Her ultimatum hung heavily. Trey swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically from Chloe's furious face to my calm expression. His twisted ego could not allow him to admit total defeat in front of the wealthy woman he was actively trying to trap. He let out a nervous laugh, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Chloe, babe, you have to listen to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking desperately. "This is all just a massive corporate illusion. She does not actually own this company. She is just a figurehead, a diversity hire they use to make the board look good. She does not have power." The audacity of his lie was impressive. He was sitting inside my fortress, surrounded by my private security, yet desperately trying to gaslight a senior executive who reviewed my financial acquisitions every single week. Chloe stared at him, her face twisting into an expression of pure horror. She was a communications expert. She knew exactly how to spot a flailing liar, and the man sitting in front of her was unraveling. She slowly shook her head, taking a deliberate step away. "Trey, she is the sole founder," Chloe whispered, her voice laced with pity. "I read the charter." I did not raise my voice to argue with his delusions. In my world, words are cheap, but documented evidence is absolute. I calmly reached out and picked up the thick manila folder my legal team had prepared. I placed it directly in the center of the mahogany table and smoothly pushed it across the surface. The folder slid perfectly, stopping right in front of Chloe. "I do not care about his ridiculous lies regarding my personal success," I said quietly, my voice slicing effortlessly through the tension. "Open the folder, Chloe. It is time you meet the mogul." Chloe hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching out with trembling fingers. She flipped the cover open, revealing the highly classified financial documents Marcus had sent me earlier. Trey lunged forward slightly, desperately wanting to snatch the folder away, but the massive security guard standing right behind his chair placed a heavy hand firmly on his shoulder, forcing him back into his seat. Trey let out a pathetic whimper, paralyzed by the physical show of force. Chloe picked up the first document, her sharp eyes rapidly scanning the dense legal text and glaring red numbers. I watched. "That is his current credit report," I explained smoothly, leaning back in my plush leather chair. "As you can clearly see, your brilliant consultant holds a credit score hovering dangerously close to 500. He has absolutely zero liquid assets, no registered investment portfolios, and no legitimate stream of taxable income reported in the last 3 years. What he does have is a staggering mountain of toxic consumer debt." If you flip to the second page, you will see the itemized statements for 6 different premium credit cards. He has maxed out every single one of them completely now. He has been buying those cheap tailored suits and paying for your expensive dinners using money he absolutely does not have. He is completely bankrupt. Chloe gasped audibly, her hands shaking so violently that the papers rattled loudly. She flipped to the second page, staring in absolute shock at the massive negative balances and the endless string of severe late payment penalties. $200,000, she breathed out, her voice barely a whisper. "How is this even possible? You told me you were closing multi-million-dollar deals every month. You told me you were actively funding startups." Trey opened his mouth to speak, but I immediately cut him off, refusing to let him spin another pathetic web of deceit. Turn to the fourth page, Chloe, I instructed calmly. I want you to see exactly how your successful fiancé travels to these imaginary high-level business meetings. Chloe frantically flipped through the documents, pulling out the page marked with a bright red legal flag. Her eyes widened even further as she read the aggressive collection agency report. The pristine Mercedes-Benz he has been proudly driving around the city to impress you is not a status symbol. According to that document, the vehicle was forcefully repossessed just 2 weeks ago, after he missed 4 consecutive monthly lease payments. He does not even own a car. He has been renting luxury vehicles by the hour to maintain his fake persona, and he is dodging aggressive phone calls from multiple federal debt collectors. He is quite literally a walking financial black hole, entirely incapable of supporting himself. The crushing weight of the absolute truth hit Chloe with devastating physical force. She dropped the heavy legal documents back onto the mahogany table as if they were literally on fire. She pressed both of her hands firmly against her mouth, desperately trying to hold back a violent sob of pure betrayal. The beautiful floral arrangements, the expensive catered food at the country club, the massive diamond ring currently sitting on her left hand. It was all a complete and utter lie. She suddenly looked down at the massive engagement ring, her eyes narrowing as a terrifying new realization hit her brilliant mind. "Simone," she whispered, her voice shaking with raw, unchecked fury. "He used a high-interest credit card to buy this ring, did he not? He bought this." "Yes, he did," I confirmed softly, feeling a fierce wave of protective anger surge through my chest for my betrayed employee. "And he was banking entirely on your massive corporate salary to eventually pay that credit card off." That is the exact moment the final piece of the puzzle clicked perfectly into place inside Chloe's sharp mind. She slowly lowered her hands from her face, turning her tear-filled eyes toward the pathetic man sweating profusely in the leather chair. She finally saw him not as a loving partner, but as a desperate, calculating financial predator entirely focused. He did not love her. He did not respect her brilliant mind or her beautiful spirit. He had specifically targeted her because of her flawless credit score and her impressive $400,000 annual salary right here at Apex Vision Group. "You targeted me," Chloe stated, her voice dropping to a low, incredibly dangerous register. "You looked at my career, you looked at my bank accounts, and you saw a human lifeboat. You and your entire toxic family planned to use me to pay off your massive debts. You were going to convince me to blindly sign. You were going to drain my savings to fund your fake mogul lifestyle. You never loved me, Trey. You just loved the fact that I could afford to keep you out of federal bankruptcy court. You are nothing but a disgusting, pathetic parasite." Her words were sharp, precise, and absolutely lethal. They cut right through his remaining ego, completely destroying the fake, wealthy persona he had spent years carefully constructing. Trey broke completely. He burst into loud, ugly tears right in the middle of the executive boardroom. He buried his face in his trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably loud. He had lost his wealthy fiancée, been publicly humiliated, and his financial fraud legally exposed. His pathetic mind instantly regressed to its primary default setting. He needed someone to fix his mess. He needed his father. Sniffling loudly, Trey frantically reached into his cheap suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking violently. He desperately swiped at the screen, tears streaming down his flushed face. I did not stop him. I wanted Vernon here. Trey tapped the screen and held the phone to his ear. "Dad," he sobbed loudly, his voice echoing pathetically. "Dad, you have to get down here right now. Simone is here. She is ruining absolutely everything today. Help me." Trey lowered the phone from his ear, his hand shaking so violently that the device clattered noisily against the polished mahogany table. Now we just had to wait. The next 30 minutes passed in agonizing, heavy silence. I simply sat at the head of the table, my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly on the leather binder containing his financial ruin. Chloe remained standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her arms still crossed defensively across her chest. She occasionally glanced at her diamond ring, her expression twisting with a mixture of profound sorrow and intense disgust. She was mourning the sudden death of a beautiful illusion, and I completely understood that silent pain. But the surgery was not over yet. The infection needed to be entirely removed from the root. Down in the grand lobby, my highly trained security team had been given explicit instructions. When Vernon and my mother arrived, they were not to be turned away. They were to be escorted directly up to the 40th floor. I wanted them to walk through the massive glass doors of my building. I wanted them to physically feel the overwhelming weight of their massive mistake before they even stepped foot into the boardroom. Finally, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. Two of my massive security guards stepped inside, followed immediately by my parents. Vernon walked in first, wearing a crisp charcoal suit that he likely bought during his supposedly prosperous pastoral days. My mother followed closely behind him, clutching her faux designer handbag tightly to her chest. Their eyes were wide, darting frantically around the massive sunlit room. The sheer undeniable wealth of the place completely bewildered them. They had rushed over here expecting to find me working a lowly clerical job, causing some sort of minor disturbance for Trey. Instead, they had just walked directly into my undisputed kingdom. Vernon's gaze finally landed on the massive mahogany conference table. He saw Trey sitting there, completely defeated, his face buried in his hands. Then his eyes slowly traveled up to the head of the table where I sat comfortably in the plush executive chair. For a fraction of a second, I saw genuine shock register on my father's face. He finally realized that the broke, embarrassing daughter he had aggressively banned from his precious country club party was actually the sole proprietor of this multi-billion-dollar corporate fortress. A normal, rational human being would have felt immediate crushing shame. A real father would have fallen to his knees, apologized profusely for his cruel words on that peeling front porch, and begged for my forgiveness. But Vernon was not a real father. He was a toxic, deeply narcissistic manipulator who had spent his entire life twisting reality to serve his own fragile ego. The initial shock faded from his face in less than 3 seconds, instantly replaced by a sickening, highly practiced expression of pious entitlement. He fixed his gaze solely on me and immediately pivoted to his favorite weapon. He shifted instantly to toxic manipulation. Simone Vernon boomed his deep voice, taking on that familiar preaching cadence he always used from the church pulpit. The Lord works in truly mysterious ways. I am looking around this magnificent room, and I am absolutely filled with divine gratitude. He took a bold step forward, opening his arms wide, as if he were addressing a massive congregation instead of a hostile corporate boardroom. God has clearly blessed you with immense, unimaginable wealth, and He has done this for a very specific, beautiful purpose. He blessed you so you could save your family in our greatest time of need. I stared at him, my face completely impassive, refusing to validate his disgusting performance with even a single blink. He took my silence as an invitation to push further, stepping closer to the mahogany table. He is a good man who simply made a few small financial miscalculations. Vernon gestured casually toward the documents detailing $200,000 of toxic debt as if it were a minor bookkeeping error. He loves Chloe deeply. You cannot let a temporary lack of funds destroy their beautiful future together. Vernon leaned forward, placing both of his hands flat on the table, trying desperately to assert dominance in a room where he possessed absolutely none. You need to immediately pay off your brother's minor debts, clear his slate entirely, and that $5 million commercial property downtown. You need to sign the deed over to him today. Consider it your loving contribution to his new marriage. If you do this, Simone, you will save his union with Chloe, and I will personally welcome you back into this family with wide open arms. You can finally take your rightful place by our side again. The sheer breathtaking audacity of his demand echoed through the soundproof glass room. He was actually offering me the supposed privilege of buying my way back into a family that had actively abused and discarded me. He thought the ultimate prize for my years of grueling hard work was his conditional, highly expensive approval. Chloe let out a sharp, incredulous gasp from the corner of the room, completely horrified by the blatant extortion happening right in front of her. She finally saw exactly where Trey had learned his predatory behavior. The apple had not fallen far from the incredibly toxic tree. Before I could even formulate a response to his ridiculous ultimatum, my mother chimed in from the doorway. She stepped forward, her face twisted into an ugly mask of righteous indignation. She completely bypassed any logical argument and went straight for the emotional jugular, weaponizing years of deeply ingrained family guilt. "How can you sit there looking so cold and unbothered?" My mother snapped, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "Your brother is sitting right there in tears. Your father is practically begging you to do the right thing. You have so much, Simone. You have this massive building, these expensive clothes, and millions of dollars just sitting in the bank. Why are you being so incredibly greedy? Why are you hoarding your blessings when your own family is actively suffering? We raised you. We put clothes on your back and a roof over your head for 20 years. You owe us this." She pointed an accusing finger directly at my face, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. "You cannot turn your back on your own people just because you wear a fancy suit now. Blood is thicker than water, Simone. You remember that. Blood is thicker than water." The room fell completely silent again, save for Trey's pathetic, muffled sniffling. They stood there, united in their toxic delusion, fully expecting their combined barrage of religious manipulation and familial guilt to magically crack my armor. They expected me to lower my head, apologize for my supposed selfishness, and eagerly write a multi-million-dollar check just to secure their fake love. They were still treating me like the terrified 20-year-old girl they had kicked out of the house 12 years ago. I did not lower my head. I did not apologize. I leaned slowly back in my heavy leather executive chair. I looked at Vernon, who was still attempting to project the image of a powerful patriarch. I looked at my mother, whose face was flushed with entitled rage. I looked at Trey, who was desperately hoping his parents' bullying tactics would somehow save him from the financial ruin he had entirely created himself. I absorbed the full weight of their combined toxicity, the years of subtle put-downs, the blatant favoritism, the emotional manipulation, and the breathtaking hypocrisy. And then finally I laughed. It was not a polite corporate chuckle. It was a deep, chilling laugh that started low in my chest and echoed loudly off the reinforced glass walls of the massive boardroom. It was a laugh completely devoid of any warmth, a sound born from the absolute, undeniable realization of my own supreme power over these pathetic, small-minded people. My laughter sliced through their thick tension like a freshly sharpened blade, instantly destroying their fragile illusion of control. Vernon physically recoiled, taking a sudden step back from the table. My mother's mouth snapped shut in pure shock. Trey finally lifted his head from his hands, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. They had never heard me laugh like that before. It was the sound of a woman who was entirely, completely free. I let the dark laughter slowly fade away, leaving the room feeling colder and more dangerous than ever before. I leaned forward, resting my forearms firmly on the polished mahogany. I locked eyes directly with my father, making sure he saw the absolute, unyielding steel in my gaze. "Blood might be thicker than water," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, quiet whisper that commanded the entire room, "but it surely doesn't pay a mortgage, Vernon." The silence that followed my statement was absolute. Vernon's mouth opened and closed silently, resembling a fish suddenly pulled from the water. He had no scripture to quote, no toxic guilt trip left to weaponize. The crushing reality of his impending federal bankruptcy and his complete lack of leverage over me finally shattered his fragile patriarchal facade. My mother stood frozen by the heavy glass doors, her face drained of all its previous entitled rage, replaced now by the cold, creeping terror of true financial ruin. They had come to my corporate fortress, expecting a frightened daughter willing to buy their conditional love. Instead, they found an unyielding executive who held the deed to their destruction. I held my father's panicked gaze for 3 long, agonizing seconds before I smoothly turned my head, completely dismissing his pathetic existence. I turned my attention entirely away from my toxic family and looked directly at Chloe. Chloe was still standing defensively near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her chest was heaving with silent, ragged breaths. She was watching my family with an expression of profound, unfiltered disgust. She looked incredibly exhausted, the vibrant joy from Monday morning completely stripped away, replaced by the harsh, cold light of absolute betrayal. She was a brilliant professional who had been dragged into a disgusting manipulative trap by the very people she thought she was going to call family. I wanted to empower her. I wanted to remind her exactly who she was before Trey and Vernon tried to leech off her massive success. "Chloe," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of the icy hostility I had just directed at my father. I used my calm, professional tone, the exact same voice I used when we were analyzing high-stakes corporate acquisitions or mitigating massive public relations disasters. She blinked, startled by the sudden shift in the room's chaotic energy, and slowly turned her dark eyes toward me. "As my senior vice president of communications, your primary job is to expertly manage complex crises and evaluate severe risks." I continued, leaning back comfortably in my plush leather chair and steepling my fingers. "You are incredibly talented at assessing rapidly deteriorating situations and protecting this company from toxic liabilities." I gestured smoothly around the massive mahogany boardroom, encompassing the sweating, sobbing mess of a man sitting beside her and the two greedy, manipulative parents standing near the door. "So I want you to look around this room right now. Assess the current variables. Look at the staggering debt, the elaborate lies, and the people demanding you finance their fake empire. What is the absolute smartest strategic move you can make right now?" The question hung in the cool, air-conditioned air, acting as a powerful psychological anchor. I was not speaking to her as a betrayed fiancé. I was speaking to her as a highly capable, fiercely intelligent executive. I watched the physical transformation happen in real time. The terrified, heartbroken woman slowly faded away, replaced by the sharp, analytical corporate strategist I had personally promoted. Chloe slowly uncrossed her arms. She took a deep, steadying breath, her posture straightening as she looked at the pathetic individuals trying to ruin her life. She looked first at Vernon and my mother. She saw them not as respected elders or loving in-laws, but as desperate, bankrupt manipulators who viewed her solely as a human ATM machine. She saw the raw, unmasked greed in their eyes, the way they had eagerly expected her to blindly pay off their massive financial mistakes. Then her sharp gaze fell upon Trey. My little brother was still sitting rigidly in his leather chair, tears streaming down his face, his cheap suit stained with nervous sweat. He was no longer the confident cryptocurrency consultant or the wealthy real estate mogul. He was just a terrified, broke little boy who had been caught red-handed, stealing from a woman vastly superior to him in every way. Chloe slowly walked over to the edge of the massive mahogany table, stopping just inches away from Trey's chair. She looked down at him, her beautiful face, a perfect mask of cold, analytical precision. "You know, Trey," she began, her voice perfectly steady and dangerously calm. "When we first met, I was genuinely captivated by your supposed ambition. I thought we were equal partners building a massive legacy together. But you did not want a partner. You wanted a highly paid sponsor. You wanted someone to fund your ridiculous delusions of grandeur because you are entirely incapable of achieving anything real on your own." Trey let out a pathetic, choked sob, reaching out with a trembling hand to grasp the edge of her tailored blazer. "Chloe, please?" he begged, his voice cracking horribly. "I love you. I really do. I was going to tell you the truth eventually. I just needed a little more time to get my investments right. We can still fix this. We can still get married." Chloe smoothly stepped back, easily dodging his desperate grasp. "Do not ever touch me again," she commanded, her voice cracking like a physical whip through the silent boardroom. "You do not love me. You love my $400,000 salary. You love the corporate bonuses my brilliant boss handed me. You love the pristine credit score I spent 8 years building. You looked at my hard work and decided you were entitled to steal it to save your bankrupt father and pay off your luxury car rentals. You are a predator, Trey, and you are not even a very smart one." She slowly raised her left hand, holding it up so the bright afternoon sunlight caught the massive, elaborate diamond ring resting on her finger. It sparkled brilliantly, a beautiful symbol built entirely on a foundation of toxic debt and disgusting lies. She stared at the emerald-cut stone for a brief moment, her eyes reflecting the cold, hard truth contained in the financial documents sitting on the table. According to the legal records Simone just provided, you bought this specific ring using a premium credit card with an astronomical 24% interest rate. Chloe stated, her voice dripping with pure, unfiltered contempt. You maxed out a line of credit you could never possibly repay, fully expecting me to quietly take over the massive payments the moment we signed our marriage certificate. You tried to trap me in your financial grave. She reached over with her right hand and firmly gripped the thick platinum band. With one smooth, highly deliberate motion, she pulled the expensive diamond ring completely off her finger. The heavy platinum band slid free, leaving a faint indentation on her skin. She held the ring between her thumb and forefinger, looking at it as if it were a highly infectious disease. Trey watched her every single movement with wide, panicked eyes, his chest heaving as he realized his ultimate meal ticket was officially walking away. He opened his mouth to unleash another barrage of pathetic excuses, but Chloe completely silenced him with a single sharp look. You asked me what my smartest strategic move is, Simone, Chloe said, speaking loudly and clearly so everyone in the room could hear her final verdict. She did not look at me. She kept her fiery gaze locked entirely on Trey, ensuring he felt the full crushing weight of her absolute rejection. She stepped closer to the table, positioning herself directly over his trembling form. Next to his elbow sat a small ceramic coffee cup he had been given when he first entered the executive suite. Chloe held the massive diamond ring directly over the ceramic coffee cup. My strategic move is resigning from this pathetic circus, she declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality and immense personal power. She casually opened her fingers. The heavy platinum and diamond ring dropped straight down, hitting the bottom of the ceramic coffee cup with a loud, sharp clatter that echoed violently through the soundproof glass room. It was the absolute perfect punctuation mark to the end of their fake relationship. She did not ask for an apology. She did not demand an explanation for his horrific betrayal. She simply discarded him and his fake promises like yesterday's trash. Trey stared down at the ring resting at the bottom of the cup, his face completely pale, his entire body trembling violently. He let out a loud, agonizing wail, burying his face back in his hands as he began to sob uncontrollably. His fake empire had completely collapsed, his wealthy fiancée was gone, and his massive debts were waiting for him right outside the heavy glass doors. Chloe did not spare him another glance. She turned on her expensive heels, her posture flawlessly straight, her head held high with the undeniable dignity of a woman who knows her true worth. She walked briskly past my mother and Vernon, completely ignoring their shocked open mouths and their desperate pleading eyes. She did not say a single word to my toxic parents. She simply walked straight through the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, her heels clicking sharply against the Italian marble floors of the corridor as she left the suffocating drama far behind her completely. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, watching my brilliant vice president of communications walk away to freedom. I felt a deep, profound sense of immense pride. She had successfully navigated her first major personal crisis with the exact same ruthless efficiency she used to protect my corporate brand. She was going to be absolutely fine. In fact, she was going to be better than fine. She was going to completely thrive without his dead weight dragging her down. The heavy glass doors slowly clicked shut behind her, sealing me inside the soundproof boardroom with the absolute worst people I had ever known. The air in the room felt incredibly heavy, saturated with the pungent smell of Trey's nervous sweat and the overwhelming stench of Vernon's shattered ego. Trey continued to sob loudly into his hands, his loud, pathetic cries echoing off the reinforced glass walls. My mother slowly walked over to him, placing a trembling hand on his shaking shoulder, her eyes darting nervously toward me. Vernon remained frozen near the door, his face a complex mask of profound humiliation, lingering anger, and absolute terrifying defeat. The initial skirmish was officially over. Chloe had successfully escaped the blast radius. Now it was just me and the toxic family that had actively tried to destroy my life 12 years ago. They had come here demanding money, demanding property, and demanding my total submission. They had completely failed. The trap had closed entirely around them. And they were finally beginning to realize that there was absolutely no way out. The ring was in the cup. The fiancé was gone. The fake wealth was fully exposed. And I was still sitting at the head of the table holding all the cards completely ready to deliver the final devastating blow. Vernon finally snapped out of his stunned paralysis. The heavy reality that Chloe was permanently gone, and with her his only viable financial escape route, violently crashed down upon his shoulders. His pristine image was entirely destroyed. His golden boy was currently weeping like a helpless infant over a discarded platinum ring. But instead of feeling genuine remorse or seeking my forgiveness, Vernon defaulted to the only tactic he had ever truly mastered. He resorted to blind, aggressive rage. He pushed himself forcefully away from the heavy glass door and marched back toward the mahogany table, his face flushed a dark, angry crimson. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You think you have won?" Simone Vernon growled, his voice vibrating with desperate malice. "You think because you sit in this fancy high-rise and wear custom suits that you can just destroy your own flesh and blood without any consequences. You just cost your brother his future wife. You just ruined this family. I will make sure everyone in Atlanta knows exactly what kind of ruthless, heartless monster you truly are. I will go to every single church leader, every community organizer, and every local business owner we know. I will completely ruin your precious name in this city. I will tell them how you abandoned your struggling family and maliciously sabotaged your own brother out of pure bitter jealousy. By the time I am finished speaking, your pristine corporate reputation will be absolute garbage." I listened to his pathetic, desperate threats without moving a single muscle. It was honestly fascinating to watch a man who possessed absolutely zero leverage try to bluff his way out of a total checkmate. He honestly believed his fading social influence in a handful of local suburban churches could somehow damage a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm. He was playing checkers while I had been playing complex financial chess for the past 12 years. I let his angry words hang in the air for a few moments, letting him exhaust his pathetic supply of toxic ammunition. When he finally stopped yelling, chest heaving with exertion, I slowly leaned forward. I placed both of my hands flat on the polished mahogany table and locked my dark eyes directly onto his panicked face. "You cannot ruin me, Vernon," I said, my voice dangerously calm and laced with lethal certainty. "Because I own you." Vernon physically flinched at the sheer coldness of my words. He opened his mouth to shout another empty threat, but I smoothly reached into the manila folder and pulled out the absolute final piece of documented evidence. It was a thick stack of legal papers securely bound together with a heavy brass clip. I did not slide this document across the table. I held it up firmly in my right hand so he could clearly see the federal seal printed directly on the front page. My mother let out a small, terrified gasp from the back of the room. She recognized the thick legal format instantly. It was the exact same format as the Chapter 11 bankruptcy petition they had desperately filed in secret 3 months ago. "Do you recognize this, Vernon?" I asked, my tone sharp and entirely unforgiving. "This is your completely unredacted financial life. This is the undeniable proof that you are entirely broke. But there is a very interesting detail hidden deeply inside these court filings that you clearly failed to understand. When you stopped paying the massive mortgages on your precious 6-bedroom suburban mansion, the primary bank did not want to deal with the lengthy, expensive foreclosure process. They wanted immediate liquid capital, so they quietly packaged your highly toxic debt and sold it off at a steep discount to a private equity firm." I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify the impending devastation. Vernon stared at the legal documents in my hand, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale gray. His breathing became incredibly shallow. "That private equity firm is called Vanguard Holdings." I continued, my voice echoing clearly off the reinforced glass walls. "And as I established earlier, Vanguard Holdings is a direct subsidiary of Apex Vision Group, which means I am the sole proprietor. I am the private equity firm Vernon. I bought your bad debt. I own the massive mortgage on the house you are currently living in. I own the peeling front porch where you stood 3 days ago and told me I was not good enough to attend your pathetic party. I own the roof over your head, and I own the ground you walk on. The absolute horrifying truth hit Vernon with the destructive force of a massive earthquake. His legs completely gave out beneath him. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany table just to keep himself from collapsing onto the Italian marble floor. His eyes were wide with pure terror as he stared at the woman he had actively abused and discarded, finally realizing she held absolute control over his entire material existence. My mother began to cry softly, covering her face with her trembling hands. Trey had stopped sobbing and was now simply staring blankly at the wall, completely broken by the sheer magnitude of my total victory. You spent my entire life telling me that I was a massive disappointment. I said, my voice rising slightly to ensure every single word pierced his inflated ego. You kicked me out onto the street with absolutely nothing because I refused to follow your rigid, suffocating script. You used your religion as a weapon to control us, and you used your fake wealth to manipulate everyone around you. But your script was a complete failure, Vernon. Your fake wealth is gone, and your manipulation has absolutely no power here in my domain. I slowly lowered the bankruptcy documents and reached back into the manila folder one final time. I pulled out a single crisp white sheet of paper. It was not a complex financial report or a lengthy court filing. It was a perfectly standard, legally binding document executed directly by my elite corporate attorneys earlier this morning. I held it between my fingers, feeling the heavy weight of absolute justice. I stood up from my executive chair, towering over his defeated, trembling form. I looked down at the man who had caused me so much unnecessary pain and completely severed our biological connection in my heart. He was no longer my father. He was just a deeply indebted tenant who had severely violated his lease agreement. You banned me from your lavish engagement party, I stated coldly, dropping the single sheet of paper directly onto the mahogany table right in front of him. I am banning you from my property. That is an official, legally executed eviction notice. You have exactly 48 hours to completely vacate my house. Vernon stared down at the eviction notice, as if it were a highly venomous snake preparing to strike. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant patriarch who had confidently threatened to ruin my name just 5 minutes ago was completely gone. He was entirely destroyed, stripped of his fake wealth, his stolen dignity, and his precious suburban fortress. My mother let out a loud, agonizing wail, dropping to her knees right there on the polished marble floor. She desperately grabbed Vernon's arm, begging him to fix the impossible situation, but he simply stared blankly ahead, entirely paralyzed by the massive consequences of his own toxic actions. Please, Simone, my mother cried out, tears streaming rapidly down her face. You cannot do this to us. Where will we go? We have absolutely no money left. We have nowhere else to live. You cannot just throw your own parents out onto the street. We are your family. I looked at her kneeling on the floor, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. You should have thought about that before you fully supported a man who actively tried to destroy my future, I replied sharply. You should have thought about family before you eagerly conspired to steal $400,000 a year from my brilliant employee. You made your toxic choices, and now you are going to experience the severe consequences. The real world does not care about your fake elite status. The real world only cares about who holds the deed, and I hold the deed. I turned my gaze back to Vernon, who was still desperately clutching the edge of the table. 48 hours. Vernon, I repeated my tone, signaling that the meeting was officially over. If you and your miserable family are not completely off my property by Friday afternoon, I will have the county sheriff physically remove you and all of your cheap possessions. I suggest you stop crying and start packing your bags immediately. I reached over to the sleek communication console built directly into the mahogany table and firmly pressed the glowing intercom button. The heavy glass doors instantly swung open, and my 3 massive security guards stepped swiftly into the room. They looked at the sobbing, broken family scattered around the boardroom with absolute professional indifference. Escort these individuals out of my building, immediately, I commanded clearly. Make sure they do not speak to any of my staff on their way out. If they ever attempt to step foot inside this corporate headquarters again, you have my absolute authorization to have them arrested for criminal trespassing." The guards moved with terrifying efficiency. They hauled Trey roughly to his feet, ignoring his pathetic whimpers. They grabbed Vernon by his upper arms, physically pulling him away from my mahogany table. My mother scrambled up from the floor, clutching her fake designer handbag like a protective shield, sobbing uncontrollably as the massive guards herded them quickly toward the exit. They did not look back at me. They were too completely consumed by their own total destruction to even attempt another word. The heavy glass doors of my executive suite violently burst open. I had barely taken 2 steps toward my private office when the chaotic noise erupted behind me. Trey had somehow managed to break away from the initial security escort at the elevator banks. He scrambled wildly back onto the pristine Italian marble floor of the executive level, closely followed by Vernon and my mother, who were actively fighting against the firm grips of the remaining guards. Their initial shock had entirely worn off rapidly, replaced by the sheer blinding panic of absolute financial destruction. They realized they were about to be cast out into the unforgiving streets of Atlanta with absolutely nothing, and their desperate survival instincts kicked in. They were not going to leave my fortress quietly. Trey practically threw himself onto the polished floor, his cheap suit wrinkling as he crawled toward my designer shoes. The arrogant facade was completely obliterated, leaving behind a pathetic, sobbing shell of a man. "Simone, please," Trey wailed loudly, his voice echoing off the expensive modern art pieces lining the corridor. "You cannot just throw us away like this. I will do anything you want. I will sweep the floors of this building. I will publicly apologize to Chloe. I will admit to everyone that I am a complete fraud. Just please do not let them take my car. Do not let them throw me in jail for the credit card debt. You are my big sister. You are supposed to protect me." He reached out with trembling, sweaty fingers, desperately trying to grab the hem of my tailored charcoal trousers. I took a swift, highly deliberate step backward, looking down at him with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Do not dare touch me," I commanded, my voice slicing through his hysterical crying like a frozen blade. Vernon pushed past one of the struggling security guards, his face covered in a thick layer of nervous sweat and terrified tears. The former patriarch of our family was now openly weeping in the middle of a corporate hallway. "Simone, I am begging you on my hands and knees," Vernon cried out, his voice cracking violently. "We will be completely ruined. The entire church community will know I am a bankrupt failure. You cannot evict us from our family home. I am an old man. Your mother has high blood pressure. Where are we supposed to sleep? You have millions of dollars. Paying off my mortgage would be absolute pocket change to you. Have mercy on us, I beg of you." My mother joined the pathetic chorus, her fake designer handbag long forgotten. She wailed loudly, a shrill, piercing sound that grated against my nerves. "We are your blood, Simone. You cannot be this cruel. We gave you life." I stared at the three of them, observing their tears, their desperate pleas, and their complete lack of genuine remorse. They were not apologizing for the years of emotional abuse, the blatant favoritism, or the malicious lies they spread about me. They were only apologizing because their elaborate financial scam had been violently exposed, and they were finally facing the severe consequences of their own toxic actions. In my corporate empire, I firmly believe in giving second chances to those who make honest mistakes. But I absolutely do not do second chances for chronic abusers. I calmly walked over to the sleek communication console mounted securely on the corridor wall. I pressed the glowing red intercom button connecting directly to the central security hub on the ground floor. "We have a severe security breach on the 40th floor," I stated clearly and concisely. "Send the tactical response unit up immediately." Within less than 30 seconds, the private executive elevators chimed in rapid succession. 6 burly security guards wearing heavy tactical gear and moving with terrifying military precision poured out of the steel cars and marched directly onto the executive floor. They were massive, intimidating men who did not possess an ounce of patience for family drama. They instantly surrounded my weeping relatives, forming a solid wall of dark uniforms. "Escort these individuals out of my building right now. I instructed the tactical team, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Do not use the passenger elevators. Take them down through the freight service elevator. If they resist, use force. If they ever return to this property, have them immediately arrested for criminal trespassing. The 6 guards moved aggressively. They hauled Trey roughly to his feet, ignoring his loud, pathetic screams. They grabbed Vernon and my mother, physically dragging them toward the heavy steel doors of the freight elevator. I watched them disappear into the cold industrial car, the heavy doors slamming shut to permanently sever their toxic presence from my life. I walked back into my corner office and moved directly to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked down at the bustling Atlanta streets 40 stories below. A few minutes later, I saw the heavy service doors in the alleyway violently open. My 6 tactical guards practically threw Vernon, my mother, and Trey out onto the hard concrete sidewalk. They stumbled and fell, empty-handed and completely exposed to the unforgiving world. I watched them slowly pick themselves up, looking around in absolute defeat. The illusion was dead. The empire was safe. I turned away from the window and walked back to my mahogany desk. I picked up my secure corporate phone and opened the executive payroll application. I found Chloe's profile. She had survived a horrific betrayal today, and I wanted to ensure she felt completely supported by her true corporate family. I authorized a secondary, highly substantial bonus transfer directly into her account for expertly dodging a massive bullet. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, but occasionally you have to buy the landfill just to evict it properly. Have you ever had to use your success to silence a toxic family member? Drop your story in the comments below. Hit subscribe, and remember, never let anyone tell you that you do not belong at the table when you have the power to buy the whole damn building.